Welcome to the Evolving Spiritual Practice podcast. I'm Ralph Cree. This is brought to you in association with bodyheartmindspirit.co.uk. In this episode, I talk to Donald Clark about his experiences over the last 4 years with cold water therapy and the Wim Hof method, combining special breathing techniques and exposure to cold water, whether it's cold showers, ice baths, or his ingenious inventions with a chest freezer. So Donald Clark is a technology and conceptual consultant for the entertainment and wellness industry. And he has a deep interest in integral theory, critical realism, and interior development. And he is a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and ADCC national champion, as well as all sorts of other interesting things he's into. And in this episode, we talk about how he got into the cold water therapy, what the benefits were, some of the unexpected side effects, and how some of those were beneficial, and he went into them and took them further, and some of them were not so good, and looked at different techniques he used along the way. We talked about some of the hype and marketing surrounding Wim Hof and the cold water therapy movement. How to deal with hypothermia, which he had a few times, just how to develop your own, unique practice with cold water over time. And I really hope you enjoy this show. I was fascinated, and it was a very deep dive into the subject. Okay, Donald Clark, welcome back to the Evolving Spiritual Practice podcast.
Yeah. Thanks for having me back and stuff. Great to be here. Yeah.
And you are kindly going to share your experiences with cold water therapy.
I certainly am.
That you've been doing for the last 4 years, am I right?
Yeah, it's been about 4 years or so now. Yeah.
And you're kind of the mad professor type, and once you get into something, you tend to go in deep. So I mean, just to sort of like, for people listening, and for you, that just to say where I'm coming from with this, I've had quite limited experience with cold water therapy. It's something I know the benefits of. I've done a lot of wild swimming in the sea, and the sea in England is pretty cold, and a lot of swimming in rivers and streams, and I did quite a lot in Scotland. I was out there for 4 months, and in the mountain streams where the snow was melting, and doing a fair bit of cold showers stuff. I find when if I'm feeling a bit kind of low, or my mood's a bit low, or my energy feels a bit stagnant, if I just hop in a cold shower, I come out like totally enlivened again. I use it for that. And I've also done quite a lot of sweat lodges at my house. I was once on TV actually on River Cottage with Hugh Fernie-Woodingstall doing a sweat lodge on the beach. So that's the kind of, maybe we might get into that as well, the use of cold water and then hot treatment afterwards. Because that's been really good. So it's something I think is really great. But one thing we have discussed, we're going to explore are some of the great things about it, and then some of the things which are to watch out for, what's hype, because it is very trendy at the moment. And with anything that's trendy in the sort of health and wellness, spiritual world, there tends to be quite a lot of hype. And so we're trying to give a an unvarnished walk through it all, and via your experience. So
Yeah.
there we go. So I've teed it up. So
Okay.
where do we start then? When did you get
Well,
into it?
I'll start with my original motivation for getting into it, actually, which it was about 4 years ago, and I had some arthritis in my left knee from years of jujitsu training. I'd snapped a few of the tendons there on the exterior side, and for some reason, and then I had an accident. I was running to catch a train and fell down the stairs and banged my knee quite badly and stuff. So there's a few things that happened to that knee that resulted in quite a lot of trauma. Um, and it was getting so bad that one leg was visibly smaller than the other leg. Um, so I couldn't do certain things like just stoop down on that leg, and I was always in pain.
Well, when you say smaller, you mean muscularly smaller,
Muscularly smaller.
the length was the same, but
The length was the same,
yeah.
but I started getting muscle wastage
Mm.
because I couldn't do a lot on that leg.
I see. Yeah, yeah. From
Yeah,
that shying away from carrying the load on the leg because of the pain.
yeah.
I see. Got it. Yeah.
And obviously, I started to feel some of that load bearing going onto my right leg. And I was very scared that I was going to um, cause a rupture in that knee as well. The body tends to kind of communicate, not just the good things, but the bad things as well, and on either side. So I'd gone to the doctors, and we had tried some like anti-inflammatories and uh, certain injections that sort of lower the inflammatory rate there, but it would always come back and come back quite quickly. And the drugs sort of made me feel, because they were very steroidal, they gave me really bad lethargy and even some depression and stuff. So the pharmaceutical medical route didn't seem to be the right case of action. So I thought, okay, it's going to have to be diet and some other holistic treatment. So I went through quite a number of things until I got to Wim Hof. And I think the thing that really sort of made me think this was going to be it was hearing about one of the experiments they did in the Netherlands with Wim Hof and some of his students, which was so fascinating. It was really fascinating. I'll give you a brief telling of that. For those in the Wim Hof community, they know it quite well, but for those who don't, I think it's worth hearing.
And I think I've watched a Vice documentary on Wim Hof,
Yeah.
and I think this was part of that documentary, which was really good, and people can look that up online.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was just the use of, they were putting something called an endobacteria, which is a dead bacteria, into the human biology, into the human bloodstream. And that bacteria, it causes an inflammatory response because of the immune response that happens and so on. So the immune system sort of kicks into gear, and you get a raise of inflammatory proteins called cytokines. Now, what they wanted to test was if this endobacteria was going to have a similar response in those people who were doing the Wim Hof method. And what they found was something quite remarkable, really, that those that were doing the breathing produced an inflammatory protein, which dampened the an anti-inflammatory protein, which dampen the inflammatory proteins and cytokines, and while still having an effective immune response and so on. So they were going through a lot of they're going through the whole process of experiencing that bacteria, but without the flu-like symptoms that come with it, and without a lot of the nausea, the claustrophobia, the sweating, etc. And I found that quite fascinating.
So, you said they were doing the breathing, special breathing exercises in conjunction with cold water therapy, or was it just breathing?
Just the breathing. So,
and this is Wim Hof's particular breathing technique.
Wim Hof's particular breathing technique, yeah.
Right.
Which, yeah.
Oh, there's a little footnote there. I tried Wim Hof's breathing technique. Just once, properly. It's one of those things where, like, there's so many things to do in life. It's just kind of like working into new habits, and I think his breathing technique is really good, and it's something I want to make something part of my daily routine. But it was, the reason why I bring it up is it was pretty impressive that I've never been able to hold my breath very long. I've been quite average in that respect. But the first time I tried his breathing technique, I held my breath for 3 minutes, and I was just like absolutely amazed.
And 3 minutes is really good for a first time as well. Like,
thanks.
It took me a bit of practice to get to 3. I was quite impressed. I got about 2 minutes or so the first time, and prior to that, I could probably only hold my breath for about 30 seconds, something like that. Which,
me too.
Which was pretty incredible. But it was the anti-inflammatory response that really excited me, because for those that don't know, when you start to get arthritis, the actual pain you're experiencing is inflammation building up around the joint, around the area affected. And so a lot of the steroids that they give you are there to clear that up. And when I found out there was a natural way of doing that, I was like, okay, I better really try this. I better get on board with this. So I started with the breathing, and the breathing was really interesting. There's this whole thing, I think you've spoken about it in a few podcasts, where if you kind of have a language that you've built up, in this case, for instance, a language of meditation or a language of interior states and so on, it's easy for you to recognize things that kind of occur when you're doing practices and so on. And so what I was expecting with the Wim Hof was probably just bodily sensations, etc. Maybe sweating, and maybe just a visceral response in my body. But I remember the first week of breathing, I had a really powerful experience of silence. Everything sort of just went into the background, and the foreground came into view as this really beautiful, formless silence. And that sort of got me hooked. I was like, wow, this is a really powerful technique for getting into really profound states of consciousness as well. And so I continued for about 3 months, every day, introducing the cold shower within the second week. Gradually.
How long were these breathing sessions? Because I know you have been doing as much as 45 minutes breathing in a day. I know you didn't start off that way, but
So they would last about 15 minutes or so initially. Um, it took it's probably within the first year of doing, I started increasing it. But initially, for the first 3 months, I wouldn't really go any further than about 20 minutes or so. Body would start to tingle quite violently, and I just felt this is about enough. This is what I need. I don't really need any further than that at that time. But I was going into the cold shower at that time, which, yeah, I've got to say it was really, really cool. Like within 3 months, I'd noticed a very drastic loss of pain in my leg. Like to the point where I could go back to the gym, build this leg back up, get it back to size again, strengthen the tendons without going through that pain and so on. But I think for me, the real discovery was when I actually started doing the breathing in combination with ice baths and so on. I kind of found that the cold showers were very interesting as a means of climatizing my body to the cold in a way. But I didn't really see the connection between the breathing and the cold shower or the cold until my first ice bath, which, is a slightly different chapter. This would be after about a year.
So just before we get off that first phase, when you're saying that breathing can bring on really intense experiences, and you were sort of pushing into it as far as you could, but you were suggesting that you could tell there was a point that you could go beyond and into something pretty radical. And I'm thinking of Stan Groff's holotropic breathing and stuff like that, where people have, what sound like full-on psychedelic LSD, psilocybin type experiences. They experience being born and birth traumas and all sorts of mad stuff. So, could you? Am I right in saying that you could kind of sense how deep breathing could go, and you pulled a little bit back from that because that's not really, you wanted to make your body more comfortable, not deal with your birth trauma type of thing.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, my sort of instinct was that I was pushing towards a boundary, and past that boundary, I wasn't sure what was going to happen. And the community on Wim Hof, very few people were reporting back those sort of interior experiences. A lot of people were sort of coming back, oh yeah, it's made me less anxious, or it's, I don't feel as depressed, or I feel more alive, or it feels like a good couple of shots of coffee, every time I do it. But there wasn't, I wasn't hearing people report back too much in regards to some of the things I later found out that are associated with this type of breathing, like trauma release, psychedelic ethnogenic states of consciousness. Early on, I discovered you could get into quite deep states of consciousness just with 15 minutes worth of it.
So it's probably a good thing that people weren't reporting this kind of thing back on Wim Hof, because I imagine a lot of people who get into Wim Hof breathing, like cold showers, they're doing this at home on their own. I mean, there's an online community, but the holotropic breath work, that was developed to be done in groups of people with skilled facilitators,
Yeah, yeah,
psychotherapists. So, you know, if you go deep and you unlock some massive crazy trauma,
yeah, yeah.
you don't really want to be in your flat alone. You know?
Well, that's the thing. Like, it's it's both it's both like it's interesting in the sense because that sort of moves towards what I might call some of the ethical responsibility of the community and so on. That I've not really visited that community more recently. I did have a little visit today before this talk, and one woman was talking about trauma release. She felt her body sort of shivering and shaking and stuff like that. And she didn't know what was going on. And the community was saying, oh, it could be this, it could be that. Whilst in actual fact, it is just the Wim Hof. It's, you know, there's so many techniques for trauma release, and Wim Hof is one of them. But there does seem to underlie a sort of, it's been marketed in a way that sort of sees it as a general well-being health kind of technique. But it does go quite a bit further, depending on how far you want to go with it.
And you know, just I'm quite often talking about doing things responsibly, ethically, safely. Yeah. But I remember the last conversation we had, we were talking about 5-MeO DMT.
Yeah,
and I said something like, you know, is there, you know, how could someone approach this as safely as possible? And you said, well, there isn't a way to do this safely. And so, I mean, you and I are both people that have done a lot of solo experimentation with all sorts of techniques and things on our own. We've gone right in the deep end, and we are adventurous people. We're not timid. So I don't want to give the impression that you know, we're not adventurous and we don't take risks. I think you can be adventurous and take risks, but mitigate the unnecessary ones.
Yeah.
It's a bit like being a mountaineer or something, and you're doing, if you're going up Everest, there is a chance you'll die.
That's the thing.
But you do check all your gear, you make sure you're really prepared, you make sure you've got a good team, you know. So it's always a balance between the you know, those two things.
Well, I think you know, like, clearly so, like, if you're jumping off an airplane with a parachute, you're going to have to be one of the most safety conscious people on the planet. Your safety is going to be of uttermost priority to you, and something that you think about more than the average person.
And in that example, well, I have jumped out of an airplane 7 times.
Oh wow!
And, I didn't pack my parachutes, so you know, I did it with an official organization in Spain. They were all packing my parachute for me. I had to trust them, you know, and that's part of it. You know, you have to trust other people. You know, and in this case, you were trusting Wim Hof. You know.
Well, that's the thing. I'm in trust of Wim Hof, and I paraglided as well, and I had to have the same trust in the person I was paragliding with, that they knew how to do it, that they had all those safety things in play, and so it's no different. Like, I hadn't had a lot of experience at that time with breath work, so Wim Hof was my first and real introduction to the whole aspect of breath work and so on. And yeah, it did promise what it said on the box, basically, which in that sense, while I was using it to sort of treat my my leg and my arthritis and my knee and so on, it did decrease my sort of inflammatory response significantly. And, you know, if I hadn't have done that, I would have, the pain was getting worse and worse. And I would have probably have had to take, you know, steroids regularly, or some other pharmaceutical drug to inhibit my cytokine intake production, which in the long term didn't seem like a great idea really at all. You know, I didn't want to end up as like House MD on Vicodin and, you know, painkillers and all that stuff. So yeah, and I haven't had the pain hasn't come back. I still have like those torn ligaments and stuff. So, you know, it's not going to cure what's already damaged, but the pain response has significantly reduced to the point that I don't notice it anymore, and so on. I think where it started to get quite wild and interesting was when I met Wim Hof and so on, which was probably about a year later. And I remember going to a workshop. He came to London and he did a workshop that consisted of about 500 people. And it was profound. It was so intense, but really, really beautiful. On one level, like we were doing breathing for about 90 minutes or something like that. And I just remember, like, you know, there were people around me who were dropping off like flies. They were going unconscious.
Wow.
You know, there was so much energy sort of being enveloped in them that, you know, like they were just shorting out and stuff. Then you'd see like one of the assistants come pick them up and give them some water and all that stuff. But breathing with 500 people like that in rounds for like 90 minutes, you know, my nervous system was just full of energy, full of energy. You know, I was vibrating like the sun. It was, you know, a really, really, really beautiful experience. Then I went into an ice bath very shortly after sort of having all that energy in me. And in the ice bath, I went in and all that energy just bundled up and then streamed out of my head. And I was left in absolute silence. I was just like in a really like beautiful place of quietness, peace, and tranquility. And the cold didn't affect me at all. I could have stayed in that thing for, you know, maybe 20 minutes or something like that. Ended up staying for about 8 minutes in there. But when I got back home, I fell into a very deep and relaxed sleep and woke up with a really intense vibration in my solar plexus. And my throat started to constrict and my heart started to open. And for about 1 week, I experienced a huge, huge opening of sadness and grief. And I didn't know what was really going on at that time. It was, in hindsight, I was opening up to a traumatic release in a way. And
Luckily for you, you were engaged in a long-term and ongoing therapeutic relationship with a psychotherapist at the time, and who could help you navigate that.
Yeah.
But do you think there are a lot of people in the Wim Hof ice bath world that are having these experiences but don't know where to go with it? would you say?
Well, I think that's the thing, because I really think that the Wim Hof method, in and of itself, if you keep to it at that sort of 15-minute sort of daily thing with the cold showers and stuff like that, you're probably not going to move into those deeper traumatic spiritual releases or openings and so on. Because I kind of did it for a year, quite consistently, just breathing every morning, going into a cold shower for about 5 minutes. And maximum would be about 10 minutes or so. The minute I took that to 90 minutes and so on, and then added an ice bath, my body opened up. And I don't know if that was because I'd been doing that opening for 1 year prior. So, you know, that 15 minutes every day was consistently opening me up. I have a feeling it's the case, but that sort of jump to the 90 minutes straight into the cold bath, and then sort of, staying in there for 8 minutes when probably 2 was enough and so on. It did open up that. It did open me up to myself in a very profound way. So there is this whole notion of Wim Hof having to be in place of a more integrated approach and so on, where you do have those other support mechanisms of trauma. If you have like a powerful spiritual experience, or you open up to your own sort of patterns of holding and trauma, it would be nice to have other sort of support networks there to kind of say, hey, okay, now you've opened up to this, let's work on it. And so
Yeah. And it wasn't only sort of emotional, psychological experiences you're having, you're also having these kind of formless void experiences, which are, quite like Zen meditation or something like that, which, again, that's a great, if you have an experience like that, that's a golden opportunity to share that experience with somebody who knows about that kind of thing, and they can point out its significance to you. Whereas the people may be having an experience of emptiness or formlessness and that kind of deep pregnant silence, but kind of gloss over it or pass over it because it's like, oh, that was kind of nice and it was interesting, but they're not really taking that any further.
Not inquiring into that, not taking it any further, and also not creating a causal link between that and what that opens you up to, essentially. For me, kind of expanding so profoundly into that silence meant an eventual contraction and so on, which I sort of experienced as a trauma release in a way. And I did have somebody, I had Gary Hawk, who really worked and helped me sort of release that trauma, to cry it out, to be with it. And in hindsight, that was a very beautiful experience, because I'm still doing that. I'm still learning to be with those things. It's not that you open that up and then it just goes away. You're now like dealing with a part of yourself that was always there. That you're now conscious of.
And that's a good point you raise about, you have these expansive experiences that feel really nice and really good and really natural, and then everything comes crashing back in. It's like, you pull the elastic band back and then you let it go and it snaps back. And it can feel like, oh, that's not right. That's not how it's supposed to go. I'm supposed to sort of experience this really nice thing and then keep that for the rest of my life. And I've done it wrong if all the kind of crap fills the space again.
Yeah.
And again, that's where some kind of mentorship can really help
Yeah.
us navigate that, to say, well, no, this is okay, let's work with it. Everything is workable. And I think that's where the practice, the idea of practice comes in, that you practice is about stretching and then contracting and stretching, contracting, and keeping on doing it, and understanding that's the flex and flow of the process.
Yeah.
And you know, you could juxtapose that with, say, somebody who goes to a one-off Wim Hof experience, like, you know, this workshop you went to, and they might have this massive experience, feel really good, and then all the crap rushes back in, and then they feel shit and feel like, whoa, you know, that was really good, but then it was already awful and I probably messed it up.
Well, yeah, like there's a lot of what's it called, blame and skepticism and weird stuff that even when it happened to me, it was sort of going through my head. What did I do something wrong? You know, was there something I could have done better? Did, you know, like the mind just goes back into hindsight. But of course, because I had some sort of structure around me, I did have a mentor, and I had people who did sort of understand or have a language for this sort of thing. It became, it didn't feel necessarily pleasant, but I did feel I'm going through a process with it. And I think one of the things, though, that that I think is interesting is that I didn't choose to go through that process in that sense. Like, you know, I had no idea I was opening myself up to that in a way. And, you know, probably if I knew then, you know, I probably would have still done it. I don't know, and stuff.
I reckon you would.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, but I wasn't expecting that sort of, you know, that sort of expansion followed by that level of contraction. And I would still say that, yeah, that did open me up to a new way of life and a new way of being and so on. There is a sort of almost like a before and after period with that. And I think the way Wim Hof is necessarily marketed and so on, it doesn't really include that dimension. They might, like the woman on the forum today was talking about tremors and shaking in her body, and so they kind of pointed her towards trauma release exercise and so on, which is very similar to the technique of Wim Hof in some respects. But I do find that the community, they're kind of ignoring that side of the method in a way. The healing goes quite deep. It goes pretty deep. It's not just like, oh, my big toe is hurting, my leg is hurting, I've got some anxiety I need to sort out or whatever. It's really psycho-spiritual in that sense. So yeah, but in spite of that, I still carry on with the method, and there are a few things I sort of learned in regards to creating more of a safe space for it.
So just so you've been to this workshop, you'd had your first kind of 90 minutes breathing plus the ice bath, this big opening happened. Then, you know, did you continue doing this on a daily basis? I mean, what were there new habits you took on after that workshop?
Well, the workshop didn't really, in terms of the technique itself, I mean, the technique's very simple, and it didn't really teach me anything new other than you can go, the longer you do it in terms of the breathing and the colder that you expose your body to, the more intense the experience, really. Um, in regards to the actual practice itself, because I had opened up, I'd sort of, the holding of trauma in my body had um, released and shifted. I found that coming back to the practice um, was different. I was having a different experience of the practice. Um, Whereas before, it could take up to 90 minutes um, to sort of get into those really um, deep, sort of, formless, formless experiences. Um, those things were now beginning to happen at about 20 to 25 minutes and so on. And going into an ice bath, for instance, after that, um, you know, it meant I might have to take the whole day off just to deal with what was coming up in me and so on. I remember sort of doing an ice bath at my friend's house. We bought 20 kilograms of ice, put it in there, did 20 minutes of breathing.
So what, you put it in a bath, do you?
Yeah, well, at that time I put it
Bathtub.
in a bath, yeah, in a bathtub. We went to Iceland, just in his car, just bought a crap load of ice, put it in the bath with some water, did the breathing for 20 minutes. I get in the, he went in the bath and he jumped straight out. It was so cold. And he went back in and he did it for 2 minutes. I stayed in there and again, within about a minute, minute 30, I was experiencing that formlessness, and I didn't go anywhere beyond 2.5 minutes really with it. But I remember it was the first time doing an ice bath after that experience. And I was interested to see what would happen. And I spent the whole day crying and, just being with this flow of emotions that were going through. I felt very fragile and open and vulnerable. And so I was like, okay, this is a different experience now. This is opening me up to my emotional body in a way, which again is almost a completely different practice now. You're kind of not doing it necessarily just for a healthy and resilient body. There's this whole other dimension, a whole other subtle body that's being influenced. So.
Yeah, that's an important thing to raise, that some people might get into this, like you're saying, just for as a wellness thing, but then start to have these other experiences of emotional releases, trauma releases, and then also some of these kind of non-ordinary meditative states of consciousness too. So you're getting more than they bargained for. So either that might interest people and they say, oh, that's really interesting, I want to go further into that, and they can look for ways and help to develop that. Or they might think, oh, this is really annoying, I don't want that stuff, I just want my body to get better, and kind of shrink away from it. But the chances are that if you keep doing it, you'll keep having those experiences, and rather than them be annoying side effects, you could actually mine that gold, that seam of gold as well.
Well, that's the thing. Like, as I say, it can be approached at so many different levels. And, like at the beginning level, it really is just a wellness sort of physical thing. It does make you feel more alive and you feel healthier as a result of it. But you can take the practice to a deeper level and so on. And
if I'm remembering rightly, I think Wim Hof, his story is that he got into it because his wife committed suicide, and he was dealing with so much pain, emotional pain, that just kind of spontaneously he started going into the canals in Holland, and it was helping him. It was like he just kind of stumbled into this thing.
Yeah,
So his motivation wasn't a wellness, physical wellness thing. It was this emotional
it
stress.
was, it was, yeah, to help his depression and so on. He kind of came out of depression doing this. I'm unsure if he did or he didn't. There are a lot of people that sort of say, I don't know if you've seen the Wim Hof documentary where they follow him around and stuff like that.
I think I have.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty clear to see that he's he's got a lot of issues.
He is a larger than life
Yeah,
character
yeah.
in so many ways.
He's a larger than life character, and you know, yeah, there's a lot going on there. But it did help his depression, and which in a way it is interesting because for me, what it did is it opened me up to my pain. It opened me up to these things I was holding that were making me feel, prior to Wim Hof and some of the other things I've done, quite numb and empty and so on. I had a hard time sort of feeling my body and generally felt quite dissociated from it. And that sort of movement into the cold really it just puts you straight into your body. And I had to feel those things. Now you contrast that with Wim Hof, who was probably feeling a lot of grief and a lot of pain. And somehow that was doing the opposite for him. You know?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It was, I don't know if it was helping him to dissociate from the pain or to kind of feel it more or whatever. But yeah, we both came into it with two quite unique and different experiences.
So that's a really interesting thing you say, that it's quite common for, I mean, I'm going to totally stereotype it, make a massive generalization, for certain type of men to be quite disembodied and dissociated from their feelings, and it's part of our enculturation. We're sort of what Warren Farrell calls the disposable sex.
Yeah,
The ones that get killed in wars and industrial accidents and all of that stuff. And it's like whether this is true or not, it's kind of an interesting narrative that him and some others have pointed to, that one way of dealing with that enculturation of being the disposable sex is to just say, I can't, it's too much to feel the feelings with it, and I just got to numb it out. It's difficult to access these parts of us. Once we sort of partition off our feelings, to actually access them can be really difficult. And if you find a method that starts to unlock them for you, that's really worth pursuing. Even though it's difficult, it's scary, and you need help doing it and all of those kind of things. But that's amazing. That you found that. For me, I think there's other things which have worked for me, and it's been a difficult and painful journey, but so worth doing, and it's been really exciting. And it's like you, I've had for probably half my life been cut off from my feelings. I think a lot of it was to do going to boarding school. Just couldn't was so unbearable when at a young age that I just kind of cut it off. And re-entering those waters, you know, it's hard. It's hard work, but it's good.
Yeah. It's very good. You know, and I sort of credit, I guess I credit 5-MeO-DMT and Wim Hof, the Wim Hof method, as opening me up to those, to my feelings, to my emotions, to the raw experience of my emotions. And yeah, it's been a bloody crazy ride in that respect. Now what I have found with it, because during the lockdown, I thought I'd continue my journey with it. And
so just before we get into so you've been doing these ice baths up to 90 minutes of breathing, 2 minutes in the ice bath. So and you said sometimes you'd have to take a whole day off afterwards. I mean, how many times a week were you doing this? And you know, was that for like a whole year or something? Or
no, I continued with the cold treatment in the shower and stuff. Buying 20 kilograms of ice every day was not only was prohibitive in cost, but just it was a hassle. So we used to do that like a couple times a month and stuff. We just get together, do some pretty profound breathing, and then go into that. And it would always, with guarantee, open me up to, like to my emotions, to my body. And it could take a day, sometimes 2 days to just process that. So I kind of had to clear space. And I didn't do that for a whole year because I felt I was spending quite an inordinate amount of time kind of processing emotions. And so it was quite a lot. Other things were happening at the time as well, sort of things that were sort of kind of beyond my control in a way, like in that sort of opening, my body was readjusting itself to something new. I discovered in therapy with Gary that half of my body on the right side was not processing sensations or feeling or emotions very well at all. It felt quite numb and so on. And it felt a bit like I was kind of getting into the Wim Hof in a sort of masculine approach to just force that open in a way. And that sort of went maybe a little bit too fast, caused some disequilibrium in my body, which ended up with me having to deal with some visual vertigo and so on, which is interesting in the sense that over the years that right side of my body has opened up. I do feel emotions there now and so on. But because you've changed something in the system, the whole system changes. And I've had to sort of learn to kind of adjust and be with that in a way. So I did stop for a while, those really strong ice baths. And, you know, I thought it was getting to be maybe like a little bit too forceful.
I'm glad you raised that because, you know, when you do the mining and you bring back some gold, you need to process that gold. And I'm making a stupid analogy here, but sort of, you know, sell it or whatever, turn it into jewelry, you know, you do stuff with it. It's not just like mine gold, mine gold, mine gold, mine gold. And then you just like have all this raw gold lying everywhere, you know. It's a 2-phase process. You do that kind of like, you know, blasting things open
Yeah.
then you've got to do something with what you've found, and it's this what you're describing there as a sort of hyper masculine, blindly pushing deeper and deeper and deeper,
Yeah.
thinking that that's the only thing that's important.
Yeah.
Whereas on the other side, you might have the other extreme might be endless processing. So it's like you just do one mining session and then you're forever making nicer jewelry out of it and just looking at the gold and feeling it in your hands and that kind of thing. It's like
Yeah.
you got to do some mining again,
Yeah, you got to come back to the mining. Yeah, there's got to be sort of an intuitive and structural process to the whole thing. And a lot of that I feel is just listening to your intuition, not blindly following some sort of weird ideology that kind of just says, oh, just go further, go further, go further. There's a lot of that out there, especially in the meditation community and stuff. And especially in the Wim Hof community as well. It's like, just do more. And so
more is better.
Yeah.
I'm also thinking of like some of those guys that, having in the psychedelic scene,
Yeah.
just quantities of psilocybin mushrooms, which are just like,
Oh,
I don't know. There is a sweet spot,
Yeah.
It's the sweet spot exists. It's a real thing.
Yeah.
And yeah. I mean,
Oh,
just as a footnote on that, we've talked before that it's possible that people don't react the same way to dosages of psilocybin, and that I mean, I've heard of someone taking 30 grams of psilocybin mushrooms, and if I took 30 grams of psilocybin mushrooms, I mean, I don't I can't even imagine ever taking that much and getting any beneficial experience out of it. It would just be all white noise or something.
Well, that's the thing, yeah.
And I think just because someone out there is having 30 grams of psilocybin doesn't mean that their bodies might process it differently to yours, and 30 grams is not probably what you need. You might need something far, far less.
Well, I challenge anybody who needs 30 grams of psilocybin, to be fair. Like we've all got different body types, etc. But I remember you told me something hilarious in response to that. You said, if I took 30 grams of psilocybin mushrooms, I'd probably turn into a Jason Pollock painting and disappear.
Yeah. Yeah, Jackson Pollock. Boom.
Yeah. It's like I've known people that have done that, and I had a friend who he was following the advice of Kalindi, I think, and he ended up taking a huge amount of psilocybin in his house, went on a roof and started shouting, and then next thing you know, the police are in his house, and they, and he's in prison with very high and so on.
Man. Yeah,
it's
that backfired a little bit.
Yeah, like
talk about set and setting.
Yeah.
So the set is like the police, and the setting is jail. No, a rooftop, then a jail. Like great. Yeah, so it's the ultimate set and setting.
Yeah. Like the ultimate setting for trauma, I think.
Yeah.
It's pretty nuts.
So we digress. Back to
but there did seem to be that sort of response in me, or just follow, and I like this sort of like the tone of the community, because I think Wim Hof, he does break records.
He's got is it 22 world records or something? I mean, it's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of Guinness Book of World Records, doing really extreme things like running through the desert, and uh, going into like an ice water that's minus 22 degrees or something like that, and going really far down and then blinding himself temporarily, and like he's an extreme character, and it does set the tone for the community in a way.
Yeah, I think I'm getting the 22 figure that from he went 22,000 feet up Everest in nothing but a pair of shorts and a pair of sandals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really extreme, and it works for him. Like I don't know where that starts to crack in him. Or if it does crack, it does seem to he does seem to be able to manage those situations. Um, but because that was becoming a very subtle body experience for me and a very emotional experience, and because I was taking it in quite a different direction, um, there was a temptation, um, having the community kind of uphold those sort of masculine values in a way, to just carry on, just take my body till it breaks in a way. But yeah, in the end, I decided not to, just to give it a break and process what was happening with me. So spent about a good year and a half doing that before returning back to Wim Hof and so on. Which sort of happened last year at the beginning of lockdown. I kind of decided I wanted to see what it was like to do the ice bath again. And I didn't want to kind of buy ice and put it in a bath. So I built a chest freezer and put that in my kitchen. Did the necessary engineering work, and filled it with water.
Could you just briefly sketch out the mods that you did to this chest freezer? It's not just like you got a chest freezer, filled it with water and plugged it in.
Yeah.
Got in it. Yeah, just in case anyone's thinking. There were some things you did to it so it would work properly.
There are things. So if you're going to build a chest freezer for this, the first thing you have to do is insulate it, to ensure that that water isn't going to run down into any electronics, or any kind of moving parts in the fridge freezer. So that's simply just lining any seam in the interior of the freezer just with waterproof silicone, and then plugging any holes with that silicone as well, and so on. The next thing that you need to do is to kind of ensure you're maintaining and regulating the temperature, and so on. So, I mean, if you just switch the freezer on, even if it's insulated and whatnot, and you stick it in there with water, if there's no way of switching the machine on and off, it's just going to turn to a block of ice, or you're just going to be kind of having to manually maintain, the temperature by putting your hand in it, for instance, and checking, is it cold enough? So you want to kind of figure out a way of getting the exact temperature. And I used a thermometer for beer and so on, for the production of beer. So it has a cut-off switch that cuts off the electricity when it gets to a certain temperature, and then puts the electric socket back on when it goes above a certain temperature. And so it's just an on and off switch, basically, that's controlled by a temperature gauge. And then after that, the other very important thing you need to do is make sure you don't grow bacteria in your in your water. So that I used a combination of chlorine and UV light filter, and just a carbon filter to pick up any sort of stray material that might be left behind, like skin or any other fungal thing that might offload from my body or someone else's body. And all of that makes a functioning ice bath.
I think there was one other element, was you put Epsom salts in so you could cool it beneath 0 degrees centigrade.
Yeah, that's right, like magnesium salts. I stopped doing that eventually, because I found that getting it below -1 and so on, and wasn't really necessary. It kind of getting it just above freezing, like 1 degree, 0.5 degrees or whatever was enough. Which,
I think you took it down to -7.
yeah,
Is that
yeah,
right?
yeah, put it down to -7 at one point, which was not only a drain on my electricity, it was unnecessarily cold.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I discovered that that was, yeah, the masculine in me again, kind of like wanted to just go for it in a way.
So
yeah.
just as a sort of disclaimer, safety, getting my health and safety hat on here, you know, I don't, just in case people go out and buy a freezer and electrocute themselves, this is like proper DIY. It's not certified. I mean, perhaps somebody may manufacture something like this, like a proper, a bit like float. I'm thinking about float tanks, which is something that we won't get into it here. Maybe we might do another podcast on it. But float tanks is something you got really into, and you're going to start up a business doing this stuff. And when John Lilly started, working with he kind of invented these float tanks. He nearly killed himself a few times, and drowning. And I mean, he was also taking large amounts of ketamine and things like that in there. But and then years later, there are these really nice flotation tanks manufactured, by certified companies and stuff. We're not at that point with, as far as with these freezer type things. I mean, so just as we are not recommending you go out and do this, if you if you do it,
don't blame me.
We're not responsible for this. We're just saying something that you did, and luckily you survived it.
Well, I survived it, and I mean, like I say, that there are things you can do. One of the other things that I forgot to mention was the electrical cutoff sockets and so on. So if you do end up with a surge of electricity for whatever reason, you can buy cutoff switches and so on that would protect you in case of a surge and whatnot. And a surge could come around from very, very silly things like not switching off your electrical supply before you get into the bath, for instance. And if any of that water leaked into the electrical supply, you would probably not have a good time. So ensuring you get that necessary electrical cutoff equipment is sort of prime, just in case you make a silly mistake like that. And also on the electricity bill, I found having a timer that would sort of switch it on at like 3 o'clock in the morning for about 3 hours or something like that, and then switch it back off and so on, so that it's not coming on for the rest of the day and whatnot. When I wake up in the morning, it's there, everything is switched off. All of these things sort of help and whatnot. But this isn't designed as a product. This is
there one out there that you're aware of?
I did check. There is a plastic bath that comes with a generator and so on. and you can kind of get the temperature down quite quickly with this in a very safe way, but it's very, very expensive, and it's primarily used for athletes when they finish training regime and so on. But to my knowledge, there is something that has been designed specifically for Wim Hof, but it's not a product that I've been able to find. When they were testing Wim Hof, they built a suit that they could cool down to very low temperatures. And so without going into a bath and being completely dry, you could actually cool your body down by just going into this suit and so on. But to my knowledge, I've not seen a product made of that.
Have we just given away all your intellectual property there, and it's a product that you could have developed yourself and become a multimillionaire riding the Wim Hof wave?
Yeah, pretty much. So, oh God.
But I mean, I'm sure I've seen it in films, and like people getting into a bath and then chucking a toaster in and dying. I mean, so people could actually die from getting electric shock is that possible, or is that only happened? Is that Hollywood science?
I think it's possible, but to my knowledge, nobody's died. Like, I'm not the only one who has built an ice bath and stuff. And to my knowledge, nobody has died of going into an ice bath. In fact, the modern float tanks that you're talking about, one person has died, but it was under very weird situation. I think they went very high on something and decided to turn their bodies the other way around. They didn't know how to turn it face up again, and so just choked on 800 kilograms of salt. But to my knowledge, nobody's actually died of building an ice bath. But then again, I don't think enough people are doing it to warrant those statistics anyway. I would say that in my experience, it's really safe. It's like provided you do the methods I've outlined and so on. Insulation is a priority, and getting your cutoff switch and timer is a priority. And if you don't want bacterial infections, you got to sort for that as well, and so on. So potentially it's very dangerous, but it's easy to solve those problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So so you built this crazy thing in your house.
Yeah.
And then so you said you started off seeing how low you could get it, and you got it down to -7.
Yeah.
How much time were you spending in there? What were the effects? And what was the journey going from -7 to above 0 and finding that as the sweet spot?
Well, that was about a week or so. Like, I took it from -7 to about 4 degrees and so on. And then worked my way down from 4 degrees until I kind of realized just about 1 degree or slightly below is as cold as I need it. I had found that even spending like 30 seconds at -7 and so on was really intense. And after a week of doing that, I started to notice that my thumb was shaking uncontrollably, and I was experiencing quite profound depression and so on. It was opening up too much too quickly, and because I was spending about 3 minutes at a time in there and so on. And yeah, for me, it wasn't really optimal. I spent a couple weeks sort of, I had to spend a week after that not doing it and then kind of reset my whole concept of the whole thing, replace the water, get rid of the salt, and then bring it up to 4, and then work my way down over the course of about 2 or 3 months, to
And
about 1 degree.
you have had, if I remember correctly, you have had hypothermia
Yeah.
as a result of doing this. I mean, more than once or just once?
Hypothermia came a few times at the beginning. So when I first started with the cold showers and stuff like that, I had to get used to the technique of breathing. There is specific, like you have to, the actual technique that Wim Hof shows you and so on, is the basics. You really need to explore your own body with that technique and come to a point where you know you're in your parasympathetic nervous system. When you made that switch from sympathetic to parasympathetic nervous system, which sort of means you're really activating your vagus nerve, and you're no longer in a fight or flight situation with the breath, and you feel very relaxed, and your blood vessels are very open and not very constricted. You have to start to learn to feel that as a transition in your nervous system, and that took a couple months to kind of feel. So I was getting hypothermia a lot, kind of going into the shower, before I had opened my whole cardio and my vascular system to being able to receive the shower. And if you don't do that, you're going in the shower cold still, and your body isn't able to maintain those temperatures to kind of, to go with the constriction of your blood vessels that the cold naturally does bring, and so on. So it's not just I'm going to breathe the Wim Hof method and I'm instantly going to get it just because I'm holding my breath for longer than I usually held it, and so on. And it is an embodiment practice, and an awareness practice.
How did you get out of hypothermia?
Shaking and just shivering. There is no real way of sort of coming out of it other than really being with it, really. I mean, I remember I did it one time, and I had therapy with Gary right after, and I was like just shaking through the whole therapy session and stuff. And he suggested maybe just go with the shake, just really shake it up and stuff. And yeah, and it did happen again. Like I was experiencing that hypothermia during that -7 sort of temperature. And I was finding that unless I was breathing for, 45 minutes or longer, it wasn't enough just to breathe for 15 minutes and go into something that cold, basically. But at 45 minutes of breathing, I'm really opening myself up to something. And again, like, dealing with all of that. I didn't want to have to deal with that. So yeah, I had to, take a week off, change the temperature, and do something quite different. What I noticed a lot of people were doing, when I kind of go to YouTube or even the friends I know who are doing it, they're putting their bodies into a place where they think the hypothermia is the desired goal. So you kind of see even a lot of people who take up the Wim Hof challenge and they make these extravagant videos. We're going to find the coldest spot in the coldest country. And, we're just going to go in there for 5 minutes, and they're shaking their ass off with a electric blanket afterwards. And it's like, oh. For me, at that point, they've overdone it. They've almost kind of moved into a place that their body isn't ready for yet. and then they're celebrating that as a victory in a way. And I think there's a much better systematic way of approaching it, which has a lot to do with feeling your body. How does it feel? What are the triggers of your body just before you get into that hypothermic state? You start to feel numbness in your feet and fingers and so on. And if you kind of stay any longer than that, that's going to go into your cardiovascular system and your blood, your vascular system in general. So the intention, sort of coming back to it, was I'm going to be very aware of my body as I breathe. Notice when I make that parasympathetic shift.
Could you just elaborate on that shift? I'm sure some people get confused by sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system.
Yeah.
Could you define what those two things are, and then also just elaborate a little bit more on how you detect the shift from one to the other?
Well, so when you're in your sympathetic nervous system, your body is generally quite wired. It's sort of the sort of effect that you usually have drinking coffee or something like that. There's an increase in cortisol, stress hormones, adrenaline, etc. And
Beta brainwave patterns.
yeah, beta brainwave patterns. You're kind of on a higher alert, and you're more susceptible to things like fight, flight, or fight, and so on. And it's not a bad place to be. It has its use and so on. If you're going through if there's a surprise event or a stressful situation that happens that captures your immediate attention, being in your sympathetic nervous system is going to be very desirable. You're going to be able to react from your reptilian brain. Your nervous system is geared towards sort of more reacting to those things, spontaneous things in the moment. It's not good if you kind of want to relax or go to sleep or experience pleasure. I mean, there's been some studies that have shown that if you're constantly in your sympathetic nervous system, you'll have problems with your erection, for instance. So having sex can be quite difficult and whatnot. If you're there constantly, you're probably you're probably experiencing things like post-traumatic stress, complex PTSD, various things like that. So it's not a place we want to be in most of the time, generally speaking, just some of the time. And moving into your parasympathetic nervous system, it's from a phenomenological perspective, and in my internal experience of it is that I feel a lot more relaxed, a lot more open in my body. I feel like there's more flow of blood throughout my whole system and so on. And I have the capacity to experience more pleasure, and I'm more receptive to positive sort of sensations in my body. I feel less constricted. And I don't think necessarily you want to be there all the time either, because the logical conclusion to that state is just sleep, you know. After like, it's pretty much, but it is a nice place to be before you introduce your body to a chaotic environment, if you're bringing a sense of mindfulness to it, which is, I think, a large part of the Wim Hof method. And it's what I discovered about the going into something very cold while having cultivated a very relaxed but focused mind state and so on. Right after doing, like the Wim Hof breathing, and kind of having that shift, which I feel is just an expansion and opening of my diaphragm, of my chest, and yeah, just more flow through my body. If I don't go into an ice bath after doing that, I feel very lethargic and I feel like I need to go and sleep for a while and stuff. And there are scientific reasons for that. You're kind of replacing oxygen with carbon dioxide. There's a whole litany of science people can go and find out about that. But when I go into the cold in that relaxed state, the cold requires me to go into a positive state of focus. And the balance between that focus and that relaxation is what I just call flow and so on. It's the intersection of those two things. And for me, that's what Wim Hof really is. It's bringing that sort of attention that the cold immediately brings to you. So you go into a cold bath and so on. And if you weren't attentive before that, you will be when you're in there, to the point that your immediate reaction is to come out of it and so on. But because you're in such a relaxed state, you can hold that sort of impulse and you can let it just flow through your body. You feel the shock of the cold, but your body's so relaxed and not constricted that that shock can just flow through you and so on, which is probably one of the reasons you're getting into those sort of deep, non-dual, formless states and so on. You're sort of having this sort of intersection between relaxation and focus and so on. Yeah, and I sort of approached it from that point of view, that what I'm doing with this bath is just putting engineering states of flow and so on. And there are kind of procedures that you have to take to do that and whatnot. One of them is that I don't want to overdo it and end up with hypothermia and then a whole bunch of emotional processing every time I do that and so on. So yeah, so yeah, there is a methodology sort of there.
One of the ways that spills out into the rest of your life that occurs to me is that you're sort of training yourself to be able to conduct intensity, which is a kind of universally applicable skill because life gets really intense sometimes. And if you can actually hold that in your system, your physical, emotional, mental, spiritual system, just actually conduct that amount of life force without it destroying you. Obviously we all want that. we all want to be able to deal with adversity and make us stronger, but sometimes it's just too much. And you can crumble, whether that's have a psychotic episode or get some severe illness. So yes, that is one of the things that people, when you do any activity, it spreads out into the rest of your life. And sometimes you can do that in a way that's quite haphazard. You just, as an experiment, I'll just do this and see what happens to my life. And then sometimes you can say, well, this is one of the reported effects of this, and I'm going to consciously engage with that and say, really, really work on how, this ability to conduct intensity that I'm increasing as I practice over the years of doing this kind of thing. How it really focus on that, and when intense situations occur in your life, you're
Yeah.
bringing that, it becomes an automatic response because you've done it so many times. In the same way, like if you're learning a musical instrument, you just pick it up and you're just playing it straight away. Whereas
Yeah.
if you've never practiced, you pick it up, you don't even know how to play a note on it or
Yeah.
something,
Exactly.
you know. And it's life is just asking you to play music over and over again.
Yeah. Well, yeah, very much so. It's interesting because I've got my own take on that, which is that the actual format of it, because it's so intense, like you're putting yourself in quite a chaotic situation on both ends. So you're going through this really big process to get your body relaxed. Then you're going through a really big process to put yourself in that ice bath. And then you're finding and mediating this flow between those two states in there. Um, what I've found is it's it's given me a state of consciousness that my body now recognizes. So it's there. It knows what it feels like, not just on a bodily level, but on a symbolic level and a ritualistic level. Um, that this is a state of flow, and so on. This is a state of opening. This is a state of deep quietness, whatever sort of comes up in that bath, and so on. But the integration into your sort of regular life happens in a very interesting way, and there are two ways of not really approaching it, but sort of integrating it. Um, One is that if you just leave it at the practice itself, what I've found is that capacity to go into that state of flow generally happens when you're experiencing a very impactful and intense stressor and so on, because you're kind of practicing this in a way that means you're sort of looking for your ice bath outside of your ice bath in a way.
Hmm.
That's your trigger in a sense. Like, where are the intense experiences that I can go and have um, when I'm sort of, what's it called? When I'm not doing this ice bath. And you notice instantly when you're doing that, that just switches on. It's there. So for instance, I remember jumping off, going paragliding and so on. And I'm shit scared of heights. And it was the first time I'd done something like that, but I'd done a whole bunch of Wim Hof prior to that. And it just kicked in automatically. It was just like, boom, okay, the anxiety just went straight out of me and I just enjoyed it. So the whole way. But integrating that as a normal state of, like, you want a piece of that just in your daily life, basically. When you're talking to somebody, or when you're kind of, just having to go for a job interview, or just something normal in a sense. I found that it's better to take the essence of that and sort of practice that in a more discreet way. So for instance, when you're doing all of that breath work and stuff, what you're really doing is opening and contracting the diaphragm in a very unique way and so on. So sort of when you're walking down the road, you might want to take a little bit of that, just focus on the diaphragm itself and walk with that notion that I'm just going to breathe and open up the diaphragm or open up the rib cage. Have that as a focus. It becomes sort of a meditation as you're sort of doing things, walking, moving, operating the computer, whatever, and so on. And because you've done so much of that breath work, that becomes very easy. It's like you're not starting from scratch. And you're also doing something that you can just carry with you throughout your day and so on.
So what I'm hearing you saying there is that it's a good idea to play with this at different scales of intensity, and like, you know, it's like practicing scales on the piano. It's like going up and down the octaves, that you're not always so the kind of caricature of the beginning part, what you're saying there is being an adrenaline junkie, and you only feel alive when you're risking your life, or having a fight with your partner, or you know, free running on some crazy rooftop, or proximity flying in your wingsuit, and, or, you know, whatever. And I think that there's a correlation there with different, like, spiritual practices like meditation or psychedelic use, that you only feel alive when you are you know, when you're smoking DMT, or you're you know, on meditation retreat, and normal life seems unbearably mundane and boring. You're not able to access this kind of like Goldilocks zone, which, you know, in normal moments. And normally what the sort of better spiritual teachings out there, or meditation teacher, it doesn't have to be spiritual, you know, it could be a purely atheist mindfulness type of meditation teaching, that was a good one, would say, well, it's not, you want to cultivate the ability to access this Goldilocks zone in all moments of your life, no matter how small, or in, you know, or how big. And it's a mistake to you know, crave the far out and wild, because that, although they are really, really cool experiences, and I'm definitely someone who promotes pushing your boundaries, you know, in all areas of your life, you know, to expand yourself. But you know, life's not all about that. And particularly if you want to have a good family life and good relationships and things, you know, I've noticed this, you know, it's difficult for people to have, if they're somebody who's always risking their life. You know, it's hard to have, you know, you know, have a normal life if you're,
well, the Wim Hof, the documentary that sort of follows Wim Hof around, that's what his family is having to deal with, and so on. There's a scene where he's going to break another world record, and his family's telling him, no, can you just stay home with us? And, you know, and he's like, no, I'm going to go do it. And so again, the tone of the community is sort of like undercast by that sort of extremism in a way. And Wim himself is constantly looking for further and further and further challenges, simply because the practice itself is generally about putting you in an extreme circumstance and seeing how you deal with that, and so on. But that's not generally my life as a norm, and so on. You know, like I like to expand and push myself as well. But over the years, I've kind of found that it's very easy for me to burn out doing that constantly. And the recovery of that is, you know, it takes a lot of life force and a lot of time as well. So sort of like that notion of taking the essence of an extreme situation and then actively and consciously trying to figure out how that applies just to the mundanity of life, and so on. I think is a practice and exercise in and of itself, because there is something you can take from it, and so on. But it's not going to come, in my experience, it's not going to come as an automatic sort of bonus for just doing the practice. The bonus of the practice is that you're practicing for extreme circumstances, and so on. You're not practicing for the mundanity of life, and so on. And so, yeah, that's been more part of my practice with Wim Hof going forward, in that that sense. So right now I only do an ice bath once a month, and I don't want to do it any more than once a month, because I'm only going into that once a month thing just to reintroduce myself to that chaos in a, what's it called, a more tempered way, and so on. I don't want to let go of that as a practice. But at this stage of my life, I don't need to be doing that every day, and so on. It's yeah, it's it's a little bit too much at this point in my life, and so on.
Yeah. And you know, what applies for you may not be the same for another person. I mean, it's, you know, it's not like you're saying everybody should only do it once a month. I mean, that's the thing. People hear some recommendation from somebody, like, you know, you might hear it from Wim Hof or some of the big shots in the community.
Yeah,
You know, they have their way of doing it, and people are like, right, well, it's to make it work, you have to do it 3 times a week, and or every day at this time in the morning, and you've got to not have eaten an hour and a half before, and you
yeah,
can't have sex the night before, and you know, I mean, it's just, the list goes on, and the things people get obsessed with, and they're taking their eye off the actual, you know, their own navigation of it themselves as
yeah.
individuals.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, because my journey has been one of both physical opening, but also emotional and spiritual opening. So it's been very sort of integrated or holistic in that sense. And I think because I am dealing with a lot of complexity in that sense, um, kind of treating it like an athletic activity, which is sort of what I did at the beginning of the thing. And at the beginning, I have to note that I didn't have that sort of connection to my body. It was um, my sort of awareness of my body and um, the mind body connection I had was not the same as it is now, and so on. And yeah, so sort of like this once a month sort of practice has become now more of a ritual. And um, I did focus a large portion of time trying to discover techniques that were using the essence of that breathing and using some of the concepts I described, the whole notion of relaxation and focus and so on, and sort of trying to build practice. Something I'm still trying and figuring out as I'm going on, and it's more of a recent thing. Um, yeah, just bringing that sort of conceptual information that I gleaned from the Wim Hof and finding practices that just suit my daily life in a way, that, yeah, don't completely just blow me into the chaos. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to be a Zen in all of this chaos now and everything. So, yeah. So, it's been a hell of a ride in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is fascinating, man.
Yeah.
I think that it's been a very well-rounded and deep exploration of it. I mean, is there anything, I can't think of anything that I can add to the conversation we've had. Is there any like parting words that you think that haven't been said, or has it all been said?
Well, I think, as I say, like, just to sort of sum up my own experiences with it, I think that the method itself is um, it can be taken by the practitioner in any way that you want to take it. It goes very deep and so on. I would like to see, some focus on the levels at which you can take it. And it might mean me eventually having to write something about this and kind of engage the community more. Something I haven't done, but something I've been thinking about doing, because I do think that it is very psycho-spiritual in that sense. And it would be nice to sort of build a language around that in regards to this community, because right now I feel as though when you do open to those experiences, the community itself is aware that that can happen, but they point you towards other systems that take care of that. Like, oh, looks like you've had a holotropic breath experience or a trauma release experience, as opposed to really taking responsibility for all of that as a community. That actually you're not having a holotropic breath experience. You're having a unique experience doing Wim Hof and so on. And that's not going to be the same as doing holotropics and, and trauma release. It's going to have its own distinctive character and quality to it. And it would be nice for the community to open up to that and to explore that more, to build a language around that. So yeah, I'll probably have to write about that and, and maybe take responsibility for that myself. Yeah, but other than that, it's a beautiful practice. And yeah, I think one can mine a lot of really, really, like real gold from it. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I can't even hold a thought anymore.
Yeah.
My mind is mush. But thank you very much for taking this time to share your experiences with it, and you've been really, very generous and really pulled back the curtain on it, in a way that you haven't you've been really authentic about what you've done. And I appreciate that. You haven't been this is hopefully has been a zero hype like in that sense that it's extolling the this is a deep and beneficial practice, but not kind of without all that marketing overlay, as you say. It's important to develop a discerning smell detector for what is just the marketing side of it and what's the authentic practice and benefit.
Yeah, which always boils down to noticing your own experience, really, and trusting your own body and what it's telling you and so on, and not necessarily just assuming that what everybody else is doing is what is the thing for you to do. In essence, I think that is the biggest thing I took from Wim Hof. It's been an exploration of my own trust and intuition in that way, when to pull back, when to move forward, what is the overarching sort of push in the community, and knowing, okay, when am I moving into ideology, and when am I moving into myself? Yeah.
Awesome.
But yeah, thanks for being a really good host and having a conversation. I kind of felt, it was nice to hear your overlap on the whole thing as well.
Yeah. Well, my pleasure. So if can you direct people to, if they want to find out more about you or anything that you care about, where might you point people?
Nowhere really.
We are not selling anything.
You can find me on Facebook if you want to reach out, or Instagram. My name is Donald Clark. And yeah, I've not reached that stage of my life where I'm, moving into the role of public figure or anything like that.
You were there, so I don't know whether you're still going ahead with this, but the float effect
yeah.
things. So you were just before COVID hit about to release this flotation tanks combined with high quality audio experiences in an actual venue in London. But obviously COVID hit and it didn't happen, but may happen in the future, possibly.
Yeah. So what's happening with that at the moment is we're going to be starting work on a website and so on. And at the moment, we're going to be looking at building an information repository for how to responsibly use psychedelics with the combination of music. So it's going to illustrate kind of how you might build playlists for yourself, dosages that you can take, how you track yourself, writing diaries around the whole thing.
Have you checked that Compass Pathways hasn't patented all of that already?
I've checked the patents actually. Yeah, the patents involve actually using specific devices for actually ingesting the material and so on. But yeah, there's somebody today sent me 100 of the most influential psychedelic proponents, and each one of them are trying to patent whatever they're trying to do and stuff. But really, yeah, the whole thing with the adding of the float is something that's still open. But because of lockdown and so on, it's really not a good time to kind of start that. The environment is still a little bit too uncertain and whatnot. So yeah, we're taking the thing that underlabored for the idea of float and music. The essence was really just deep listening with psychedelics and so on. And yeah, so we kind of hope to have that open by November, and hopefully maybe by then we'll do another podcast or something, and I can give a website and stuff like that. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Donald.
Yeah. Thank you.
Lots of love, bro. I made all the music that I use in my podcasts. If you'd like to hear more of my music, please visit SoundCloud and check out my profile, Ralph Cree.